The Persian Gulf is in flames. Bandar Abbas was rocked. Qeshm Island was hit. 6 explosions were heard in Minab within 40 seconds. Iran's southern coast sea bridges shut down in an instant. On the night of May 7th, USS Mason, USS Truxtun, and USS Rafael Peralta, 3 Ali Burt-class guided missile destroyers, were transiting through the Strait of Hormuz toward the Gulf of Oman, an escort mission under the U.S. Project Freedom. For the IRGC, this was an unbearable sight. They were panicking more each day under the blockade, losing more blood with every tanker seized. A disagreement had broken out between the U.S. and Gulf states, and as 3 American destroyers were passing through the strait, the IRGC thought, the moment is now. The attack appeared coordinated. Kamikaze drone swarms, a mix of ballistic and cruise missiles, armed fast attack boats. The entirety of the IRGC's sea denial doctrine was activated at once. But this attack was exactly what the US wanted, and America's response came within minutes. Iran's southern coast controlling the Hormuz was engulfed in flames. Now we need to step back and look at the design of this operation, because most people read the night of May 7th as a clash. But this was not a clash. This was a trap. These destroyers were not parked in Hormuz to be defended. They were bait, parked there to be attacked. Why? Because Iran possesses a massive underground arsenal built over decades stretching from Qeshm Island to Bandar Abbas and Bandar Kamir. The IRGC calls them missile cities. And this name is not an exaggeration. According to Al Jazeera, beneath Qeshm Island, there exists a tunnel network carved into hard sedimentary rock and salt formations, extending for dozens of kilometers. Inside are Noor and Qadir anti-ship cruise missiles, Qadir 380s with ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers, Qiyam-1 ballistic missiles, and HY-2 silkworms for close-range tanker strikes. And it's not just missiles. Underground naval bases built at a depth of 500 meters exist in Bandar Abbas. Hundreds of fast attack boats the IRGC calls Red Wasps are hidden inside these tunnels. According to the Wall Street Journal, more than 60% of the IRGC's fast attack boats are still protected in these underground coastal bases, carved into mountainsides along the coast, nearly impossible to detect from the air. The US problem was this: as long as these weapons stayed underground, they couldn't be destroyed. Radars couldn't see them. Satellites couldn't detect them. Unless Iran used these weapons, the US couldn't touch them. Convincing Iran to expose these weapons was the foundation of the entire operation. 3 destroyers were the bait. The IRGC's Mosquito fleet would attack. US satellites would track launch points in real time, and the moment the IRGC emerged from underground, before the smoke even cleared, the US would destroy those launch points. And that is exactly what happened. The IRGC activated kamikaze drone swarms, cruise missiles, and armed fast attack boats. The Revolutionary Guard's media would later claim they targeted at least 3 US warships, and the ships fled rapidly. CENTCOM confirms none of these claims, and there is not a single piece of evidence that American vessels sustained any damage. What happened on the ground was very different from the IRGC's narrative. The Aegis ballistic missile defense system, a platform capable of simultaneously tracking hundreds of targets, assessing threats, and launching counter-missiles within seconds, destroyed the IRGC's entire attack wave in the air. According to CNN, the Haydar 110 missile-launching vessels that the IRGC had unveiled in Bandar Abbas in February 2025, fast attack boats capable of firing cruise missiles, were in the front lines of this attack. The Red Wasps had entered the water. None reached their target. 0 damage, 0 casualties. In Trump's words, missiles were shot and beautifully knocked down. Drones came and were incinerated in the air, just like a butterfly dropping to its grave. Boats were sent to the bottom of the sea, quickly and efficiently. And the US, exactly according to plan, immediately retaliated. CENTCOM struck critical targets in southern Iran under self-defense. And the target selection was not random. It was directly linked to the facilities the IRGC had exposed during the attack. Bandar Abbas, the main base of the Revolutionary Guard's naval forces. This port had also been hit during Operation Epic Fury in February. Major platforms like the Shahid Bagheri and Makran had been sunk to the harbor floor. Iran had repaired it. Now it was in flames once again. The Bahman port and IRGC naval facilities on Qeshm Island. When they opened the doors of that missile city, the US was waiting for exactly that. The IRGC Naval Police checkpoint in Minab. Missile and drone launch positions in Sirik and Bandar Kamir. The first explosion footage spread across social media within minutes. Iran's military command issued an official statement. The US and regional countries struck Bandar Abbas, Sirik, and Qeshm. Iran retaliated. US warships were hit east of Hormuz. In reality, the IRGC had actually managed to create tension and disagreement between the Gulf Arab states and the US. On the surface, the situation appeared to favor the IRGC. And at that exact moment, when Saudi Arabia had closed US base access for 6 hours, Trump had wanted to pause the project, and diplomatic channels had opened. The IRGC made a calculation. The Americans are divided. Their allies are angry, now or never. But the US operation had been prepared in a coordinated manner. Shortly before the events, at least 5 KC-135 aerial refueling aircraft had launched from the UAE. 4 more tankers were flying over Israel and Jordan. This aerial activity indicates the US was prepared for the attack possibility. CENTCOM had likely received intelligence of the IRGC's initiative in advance and activated the counterstrike plan. And the US military presence in the region made this operation possible. 3 carrier strike groups, USS Abraham Lincoln, USS Gerald R. Ford, and the 3rd group arriving in early May, constituted the largest naval force buildup in the region since World War II. Their decks carried F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, F/A-18E/F Super Hornet strike aircraft, and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft. On land, F-22 Raptors at Ofda Air Base in Israel, F-15E Strike Eagles at Azraq in Jordan, F-16s at Al-Qaj in Saudi Arabia, and MQ-4C Triton reconnaissance drones at Al Dhafra in the UAE were positioned. The US could see the IRGC's desperation. Every seized tanker pushed Iran further into a corner. It knew the attack was coming. It sent 3 destroyers into the strait, but not to defend them, to draw Iran out from underground. This is the logic of modern great power conflict. You don't wait to be hit. You design the blow so that the other side exposes its weapons and you can hit back harder. The most striking dimension of this conflict may be in Iran's own internal dynamics. For years, the IRGC had been using an asymmetric swarm attack doctrine, a strategy of overwhelming large warships with hundreds of speedboats, kamikaze drones, and cruise missiles. The Haydar 110 missile-launching vessels, unveiled in Bandar Abbas in February 2025, fast attack boats capable of firing cruise missiles, were the newest weapons of this doctrine. May 7th may have refuted this doctrine in practice. The IRGC's coordinated attack, drone swarms, missiles, and fast attack boats, inflicted 0 damage against the US Aegis system. In Trump's words, these boats were sent to the bottom of the sea. Missiles were fired and knocked down. Drones were incinerated in the air, just like a butterfly dropping to its grave. But Tehran's internal narrative lives in an entirely different world. A group gathered in Revolution Square celebrated, genuinely believing they had destroyed 3 US destroyers. State television hid casualties while steering public opinion with fake victories. The IRGC's propaganda machine may have entered a dead end. If the attack had succeeded, it would have closed the strait, carrying 20% of the world's oil supply, and sunk its own economy even further. Having failed, it tries to deceive its own people by declaring victory. Either way, Iran loses. And the most concrete indicator of the regime's detachment from reality, President Pezeshkian attending a meeting supposedly with Supreme Leader Khamenei, but according to images shared on social media, a cardboard cutout was in Khamenei's place. Pezeshkian praised the cardboard leader's humility and simplicity. Independent verification of this claim has not yet been made, but the debate generated by the images deepens the regime's perception problem. The damage to commercial port facilities in Bandar Abbas and Qeshm may mean Iran is cutting its own trade arteries with its own hands. Beyond the military pressure, the US also has an economic strangulation strategy. and this strategy may threaten Iran even more than military strikes. Trump's statement that, if Iran's oil gets blocked, it will start to implode from within in a few days, may seem exaggerated, but there's concrete physics behind it. Iran produces 2 to 3.5 million barrels of oil per day. This oil must be in constant movement through ports like Karg Island and export terminals. A large portion of the government's budget depends on this flow. When exports are blocked, the system doesn't stop. It starts to clog. Storage tanks fill rapidly. Iran has approximately 40 to 90 million barrels of storage capacity, but under full production, this space runs out surprisingly fast. When those tanks reach storage limits, Iran faces a ruthless choice. Either cut production and suffer revenue losses exceeding hundreds of millions of dollars daily, or continue pumping oil into a system that can send it nowhere. The first choice is revenue loss. The second is infrastructure damage. If production continues, pressure builds in pipelines. Heavy components in crude oil, waxes and asphaltenes start to separate and stick when flow slows. Blockages, efficiency drops, and in some cases, permanent damage to the reservoir itself. The US strategy is not just military, it's maximum pressure directly targeting Iran's oil export capability. Cutting revenues, weakening the state's ability to finance itself, and creating internal economic stress that forces a decision, without direct military escalation. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20% of global oil supply, and now ships are firing at each other in those waters. Oil prices immediately breached the $100 barrier after the attack. Thousands of ships backed up at strait entrances. Insurance premiums soared to astronomical levels. Some companies completely stopped Hormuz transit. China's response stayed on its traditional line, calling it a dangerous provocation while avoiding direct military intervention. China, as a major importer of Iranian oil, wants the strait to remain open, but can't take concrete steps. Russia's rhetoric is sharper. Moscow condemns America's hegemonic actions. But there's an interesting detail. Russia is using the energy price surge from the Strait crisis to its own advantage. As oil prices exceed $100, Russia's Asia-bound exports appreciate further. Moscow may be collecting the economic fruits of the chaos Iran created while providing diplomatic support to Iran. Beyond calls for restraint, China and Russia can't take concrete action. Iran may be completely alone in a military escalation. Tehran's greatest allies won't stand beside it in a hot conflict. They only support with their vetoes at the UN podium. Iran's retaliation options appear limited. The Revolutionary Guard's missile and drone fleet still poses a threat, but US-Israeli operations since February 2026 have severely depleted stocks. The more likely scenario, proxy forces, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shiite militias in Iraq. But this proxy network's capacity is also shrinking. Hezbollah has suffered heavy losses. The Houthis are worn down. The Iranian leadership's preference will likely be strategic patience, a strategy of creating long-term tension rather than a sudden strike. But every new incident in the Hormuz pushes the limits of that patience a little further. Iran is militarily weakened, but it still holds the fuse of the global economy. At least, that's what it claims. Iranian sources have drawn a coordinated escalation scenario that would simultaneously collapse the world's oil supply, the Gulf's internet, and the Europe-Asia connection. Let's examine them one by one. First threat: the Yanbu pipeline. If this pipeline carrying Saudi oil to the Red Sea is hit by Iranian missiles, Saudi Arabia's backup route bypassing Hormuz would be closed. Second threat: Fujairah, one of the world's largest fuel bunkering hubs in the UAE, within Iran's missile range, and it has been targeted before. Third threat: Bab el-Mandeb. When Hormuz closes, the only alternative route left is this strait. Iran's ally the Houthis control it. If Iran activates the Houthis, the world's two major maritime choke points would close simultaneously. Fourth threat: underwater cables. Approximately 7 major cable systems passing through the Strait of Hormuz carry more than 97% of all Gulf internet traffic. Iranian sources published a detailed map of these and described them as extremely vulnerable. Iranian UAVs have previously attacked data centers in Bahrain and the UAE. If all three happen simultaneously, a quarter of the world's energy supply would disappear instantly. Saudi Arabia would have no backup route left, and Gulf states would be plunged into digital darkness. Cloud infrastructure, financial systems, communications would collapse. But now let's ask the real question. Can Iran do this? Short answer, very difficult. The US Navy is currently positioned in the Gulf with 3 carrier strike groups. Underwater teams are on active duty, with cable and infrastructure protection capability. The Houthis can threaten Bab el-Mandeb, but the US is already managing this risk by routing Bush around that strait. Yanbu Pipeline and Fujairah, these are within Iran's missile range. But such an attack would show that Iran has officially broken the ceasefire and declared direct war on Saudi Arabia and the UAE. This would fully unite the coalition against Iran, and Iran is not in a position to withstand that. Are Iran's cards a real leverage? Yes, in theory. But the cost of using each one is heavier than the card itself. And the US is building up precisely to deter Iran from playing any of these cards. The real question is this: is a regime acting in panic sober enough to calculate the cost? The US had set a trap. The IRGC fell for it. 3 American destroyers entered the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Mosquito fleet attacked. They opened the doors of their underground missile cities, and the US was ready for that moment. The weapons the IRGC had hidden for decades were destroyed the instant they were exposed. The sea denial doctrine the Revolutionary Guards built over decades, the strategy of overwhelming large ships with swarm attacks, was seriously called into question in a single night. Their own port cities hit, their own trade arteries cut, their allies settling for nothing more than calls for restraint. Now Iran has a narrow road ahead, and the width of that road is the same as the narrowest point of the Strait of Hormuz, 54 kilometers, and it's getting narrower with every passing hour. So what do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.